She died and saw something terrible. Priests in hell for preaching a false gospel. But what she discovered changed everything. You might think this is just another religious story, but what she saw will shake your faith. My life changed forever on that fateful night. What began as a routine trip down Highway 101 turned into a journey beyond this world. An experience that would shake the foundations of my faith and launch me on a mission I could never have imagined. It was a rainy October night. I was returning home after a long day of work at the Catholic school where I had been teaching for over a decade. The raindrops rhythmically hit the windshield, almost hypnotizing me. I remember thinking about how eager I was to get home and rest. That's when it happened. A flash of headlights, a scream of tires skidding on wet asphalt, and suddenly my world spun. I felt the violent impact, the deafening sound of metal twisting, and then silence. What came next was surreal. I found myself hovering over the accident scene, looking at my own bloodied body inside the wrecked car. Paramedics arrived quickly, and I watched them working frantically to revive me. "Come on, stay with us," one of them shouted, applying the defibrillator. I wanted to tell them I was fine, that I was right there, but no sound came out of my mouth. That's when I noticed a bright light forming to my right. The famous tunnel of light that so many people describe in near-death experiences. I felt drawn to it, a sense of peace enveloping me. Is this how it ends? I thought. But as I approached the light, something changed. The feeling of peace was replaced by an oppressive and frightening presence. The light began to darken, and I was engulfed by a suffocating darkness. Tormented voices echoed around me, screams of anguish and despair. And then I saw something that chilled me to the soul. Figures dressed in cassocks, priests I recognized, some I even knew personally, suffering unimaginable torments. "Please, forgive us," one of them cried, his voice laden with regret and pain. Another, whom I recognized as Father Thomas from my parish, begged, "We didn't know. We thought we were doing the right thing." Their pleas were ignored by a dark and imposing presence that hovered over them. A voice, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, reverberated through my being. "These are those who distorted my word. They spread lies in my name, leading many down the path of perdition." Horrified, I tried to argue. "But they are men of God. How can they be here?" The voice answered, stern, "Judge not by appearance, but judge with righteous judgment." They preached a false gospel, placing human traditions above my truth. Images began to float before me, doctrines I had always accepted without question, rituals that seemed empty of real meaning, teachings that contradicted the very words of Jesus that I read in the Bible. "But what about me?" I asked, trembling. "I taught these things too." "That is why you are here," said the voice, now softer. "To see, understand, and warn. Many are being deceived, led down paths that do not lead to me. You must return and tell the truth." Before I could process what was happening, I felt a violent pull. The voices and visions began to dissipate, and I heard in the distance, "We have a pulse. She's coming back." I opened my eyes, dazzled by the lights of the ambulance. The pain in my body was intense, but nothing compared to the agony in my soul. The images of what I had seen were etched in my mind, and I knew my life would never be the same. "Welcome back," said the paramedic, smiling with relief. "You gave us quite a scare." I wanted to tell him, to say what I had seen, but the words wouldn't come out. How could I explain something so profound and disturbing? How would people react if I told them I had seen priests in hell? At that moment, as I was being taken to the hospital, I made a silent promise. Regardless of the consequences, I would tell the truth. I would warn people about what I saw. Little did I know that this decision would set me on a path of conflict, rejection, and discoveries that would shake not only my faith but that of millions of people around the world. The days following my near-death experience were a whirlwind of emotions and confrontations. While my body recovered in the hospital, my mind couldn't shake the terrifying images I had witnessed. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the tormented faces of those priests, heard their cries of anguish. On the morning of the third day, I received a visit from Father Robert, the pastor of my church. He entered the room with a comforting smile, holding a bouquet of flowers. "Mary, it's good to see you awake," he said, placing the flowers on the table next to the bed. "Everyone in the parish is praying for your recovery." I hesitated for a moment, but I knew I needed to share what I had seen. "Father Robert, I need to tell you something that happened when I died." His smile faltered for an instant. "Of course, Mary. Whatever you want to share." I took a deep breath and began to narrate my experience. As I spoke about the tunnel of light, the darkness, and the priests I saw suffering, Father Robert's face changed. What started as an expression of concern soon turned into disbelief and, finally, into something close to fear. When I finished, the silence in the room was palpable. Father Robert cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "Mary, you've been through a terrible trauma. It's common for the mind to create disturbing images in situations of extreme stress." "No, Father," I insisted, feeling a growing urgency. "It wasn't a hallucination. It was real, and we need to do something about it. People need to know the truth about." "Mary," he interrupted me, his voice now firm. "You need to rest. These ideas, they're not healthy. I'll ask the doctor to evaluate if you need any psychological support." I was shocked by his reaction. "Father, please, you need to listen to me. What I saw." But he was already getting up, clearly anxious to end the conversation. "Rest, Mary. I'll come back to see you in a few days when you're feeling better." In the days that followed, I realized that Father Robert's reaction wasn't unique. My family and friends reacted with a mixture of concern and skepticism when I tried to share my experience. My sister, Sarah, came to visit me a week later. As she helped me pack my things for hospital discharge, I tried once again to explain what had happened. "Sarah, you need to understand. What I saw, it changes everything. The way we live our faith, the things we've been taught." Sarah sighed, putting a change of clothes in my bag. "Mary, listen. You've been through something traumatic. It's normal for your mind to be confused. But these ideas, they're dangerous. People will think you've gone crazy. But what if I'm right?" I argued. "What if everything we believe is wrong?" "Stop it, Mary," Sarah exclaimed, turning to me with teary eyes. "Don't you see what you're doing? You're questioning everything we believe in, everything our parents taught us. Please, stop this before you hurt more people." Her words hit me like a punch. I had been so focused on sharing the truth that I hadn't realized how it was affecting the people around me. But how could I simply ignore what I had seen? In the months that followed, my search for answers intensified. I spent hours studying religious texts, comparing doctrines, looking for inconsistencies. Each discovery I made only increased my conviction that something was deeply wrong with much of what we had been taught. I tried to share my findings with my colleagues at the Catholic school where I taught, but I was met with distrust and even hostility. "Mary, you need to stop this," Sister Agnes, the principal, warned me after a particularly tense meeting. "Your ideas are disturbing the other teachers, and even some parents are starting to ask questions." "But Sister Agnes, don't you see that this is important? If what we're teaching isn't the complete truth—" "Enough," she interrupted me, her face red with anger. "Either you stop this madness, or we'll have to reconsider your position here at the school." It was at that moment that I realized my search for truth had a price. I was losing friends, alienating my family, and now my job was at risk. But something inside me wouldn't let me stop. The images of what I saw on that fateful night remained vivid in my mind, propelling me to continue. That night, alone in my apartment, I looked at the pile of books and notes I had accumulated. What have I gotten myself into? I murmured to myself. But then, as if in response, I felt an inexplicable peace envelop me. I knew, deep in my heart, that I was on the right path. Regardless of the consequences, I would continue my search for the truth. The world needed to know, and I would be the messenger, no matter the cost. As my search for truth intensified, my life began to take an increasingly dark and disturbing turn. Nights became a torment, filled with visions that left me in a cold sweat and trembling upon waking. On one particularly difficult night, I woke up screaming, the images of hell still vivid in my mind. I looked at the clock. 3:15 a.m. My heart was racing as I tried to calm my breathing. It's just a dream, I muttered to myself, but I knew it was more than that. Suddenly, I heard a whispering voice in the room. It's not a dream, Mary. It's a warning. I froze, my eyes scanning the dark room. Who's there? I asked, my voice trembling. Someone who knows the truth, the voice replied. Just like you. I turned on the bedside lamp, but the room was empty. It was happening again, mysterious voices, disturbing visions. Was I really losing my sanity, as everyone seemed to think? The next day, exhausted and shaken, I decided to visit the local library to continue my research. As I leafed through a book on early Christian doctrines, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Mary, is that really you? I turned and saw Thomas, an old colleague from theology school. His face showed a mixture of surprise and concern. Thomas, what a surprise to see you here, I replied, trying to force a smile. He looked at the pile of books on my table. Medieval heresies? Gnostic doctrines? Mary, what's going on? I hesitated for a moment, but something told me I could trust him. Thomas, do you remember my accident? He nodded, sitting down next to me. Well, there's something I haven't told anyone, or rather, something people refuse to believe. In the next few minutes, I poured out everything. The near-death experience, the visions of hell, the suffering priests, the voices and dreams that continued to torment me. Thomas listened in silence, his expression changing from skepticism to concern and, finally, to hesitant understanding. Mary, this is incredible, he finally said, and frightening. Have you considered that this might be more than just a personal experience? That you might have been chosen for a mission? His words hit me like lightning. A mission. That was exactly how I felt, but hearing someone else say it out loud made it all more real. But Thomas, what if I'm wrong? What if it's just my mind playing tricks on me? He took my hand, his gaze intense. Mary, I've been studying ancient texts for years. There are many things in church history that have been, let's say, adjusted over time. What you're describing, it's not so far from some accounts I found in apocryphal texts. I felt a mixture of relief and fear. Relief at finally finding someone who didn't think I was crazy, and fear of the implications of what Thomas was saying. What should I do, Thomas? He took a deep breath. Continue your research. Document everything. And Mary, be careful. If what you saw is true, there are powerful people who won't want this to come to light. In the days that followed, I delved even deeper into my quest. Each new piece of information I discovered seemed to fit perfectly with what I had seen in my experience. It was as if a veil was being lifted, revealing a spiritual reality that few dared to face. One night, while working on my notes, I heard that mysterious voice again. The time is coming, Mary. You must be ready to reveal the truth. But how? I asked the empty air. Who will believe me? Those who have ears to hear will hear, the voice replied. Your mission is not to convince everyone, but to plant the seed of truth. That night, I had another vivid dream. This time, it wasn't hell I saw, but a multitude of lost people wandering in a thick fog of deception and confusion. In the dream, I was on a podium, my voice echoing over the crowd, dissipating the fog with each word of truth I uttered. I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. I knew what I needed to do, no matter the personal cost, no matter who tried to silence me. I had a mission, and it was time to take the next step. I picked up my phone and dialed Thomas's number. Hello, his sleepy voice answered. Thomas, it's Mary. I'm sorry to call so early, but I think it's time. We need to start sharing what we've discovered. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Are you sure, Mary? You know there's no going back after this. I took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. I'm sure. The world needs to know the truth, no matter how painful it may be. Okay, he replied, his voice now fully awake. Let's do this. God help us. As I hung up the phone, I felt the weight of responsibility on my shoulders. The path ahead would be difficult, full of obstacles and dangers. But for the first time since my near-death experience, I felt truly alive, fulfilling a purpose greater than I could have imagined. The decision to publicly share my discoveries was the turning point in my journey. Thomas and I began organizing small meetings at his house, inviting carefully selected people, individuals who demonstrated an open mind and a genuine search for spiritual truth. Our first meeting was tense. Sitting in Thomas's living room, I faced the curious and skeptical faces of about 10 people. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice trembling. "What I'm going to share with you today may seem shocking, even impossible, but I ask that you listen with an open heart." As I recounted my near-death experience and subsequent discoveries, I saw expressions change from skepticism to amazement, and in some cases, to recognition. A middle-aged woman, Clara, timidly raised her hand. "Mary, I've seen something similar too. Years ago, I had a similar experience, but I never dared tell anyone. I thought they'd call me crazy." Others began to open up. John, a former seminarian, shared, "I always felt there was something wrong with certain teachings, but I never had the courage to openly question them." As more people shared their experiences and doubts, I realized I wasn't alone. There were others like me, seeking answers, questioning long-established doctrines. The meetings grew quickly. Within a few weeks, we were renting small auditoriums to accommodate the growing number of participants. However, with growth came challenges. One night, after a particularly intense meeting, I was approached by a serious-looking man. "Ms. Mary?" he asked, extending his hand. "I'm Reverend James Callahan. I'd like to have a word with you." I felt a chill down my spine. Reverend Callahan was known to be a staunch defender of religious orthodoxy. "Of course, Reverend," I replied, trying to keep calm. "What you're doing is dangerous," he said, his voice low and threatening. "You're sowing discord and confusion among the faithful. I suggest you stop these meetings before things get unpleasant." I swallowed hard but stood firm. "Reverend, I'm only sharing the truth that was shown to me. If this causes discomfort, perhaps it's because there's something wrong with what we've accepted as truth." He gave me an icy look. "You've been warned," he said, before turning and leaving. That night, I shared the incident with Thomas. "This was expected," he said, running his hand through his hair in frustration. "Mary, we need to be more careful. Maybe we should consider moving our meetings to more discreet locations." I reluctantly agreed. In the months that followed, our group became a kind of secret society. We used codes to arrange meetings, constantly changed locations, and were extremely careful about who we invited. Despite the precautions, our message continued to spread. People from all over the country began to contact us, sharing their own near-death experiences, visions, and questions about established doctrines. One of these people was Sarah, a nurse from a hospital in Chicago. "Mary," she said in one of our online meetings, "after hearing your story, I finally found the courage to speak up. For years, I've been assisting patients in their final moments. Many of them, especially those who were considered very religious, seemed terrified at the moment of death. They mumble about deceptions, false teachings. I always wondered what that meant." Her story further reinforced our conviction. We weren't just a small group of dissidents. We were part of something bigger, a spiritual awakening that was happening silently across the country. However, as our influence grew, so did the opposition. We started receiving anonymous threats. Some members of our group lost their jobs. Others were ostracized by their families and religious communities. One night, after a particularly tense meeting where we discussed the growing pressures against us, I stayed behind to tidy up the venue. Thomas approached me, his face showing concern. "Mary, have you considered that we might be putting ourselves in real danger? These aren't just empty threats. There are powerful people who have a lot to lose if the truth comes out." I looked at him, feeling the weight of our mission. "I know, Thomas, but how can we stop now? There are so many people counting on us, seeking the truth. If we back down, who will speak for them?" He nodded slowly. "You're right, but we need to be smarter. Maybe it's time we took our message to a larger audience, where it will be harder to silence us." That conversation planted the seed of what would become our greatest challenge and our greatest opportunity. We decided it was time to come out of the shadows and take our message to the world. We didn't know exactly how we would do it, but we were sure of one thing. There was no turning back. The path ahead would be difficult, but the truth needed to be revealed, no matter the cost. The decision to take our message to a wider audience was both exciting and terrifying. We knew we were about to cross a point of no return, but the urgency to share the truth outweighed our fears. Thomas managed to schedule an interview on a popular podcast about spirituality and unexplained phenomena. The night before the recording, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed, mentally reviewing everything I planned to say. In the morning, as I was preparing to leave, I received a call from Sarah, one of the most dedicated members of our group. "Mary, are you sure about this?" Her voice trembled with concern. "Once this airs, there's no going back." I took a deep breath before answering. "I know, Sarah, but it's time for the truth to come out. We can't hide anymore." Arriving at the studio, I was greeted by Jake, the podcast host. His friendly smile helped calm my nerves. "Mary, it's a pleasure to have you here," he said, guiding me to the studio. "I'm looking forward to hearing your story. We've been receiving a lot of messages since we announced your participation." I nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility. "Thank you for this opportunity, Jake. I hope your listeners are ready for what I'm going to share." The interview started calmly. Jake asked me questions about my near-death experience, and I answered as honestly and directly as possible. But when I started talking about what I saw in the afterlife, the priests in hell, the revelations about false doctrines, I felt a change in the atmosphere of the studio. Jake leaned forward, his eyes wide. "Mary, you're aware that what you're saying is extremely controversial, aren't you?" I nodded firmly. "Yes, Jake. I know it's hard to believe, but it's the truth. And there's more." It was then that I shared our subsequent discoveries, the inconsistencies we found in established doctrines, the testimonies of other people who had similar experiences. With each revelation, I saw Jake's face alternate between shock and fascination. About half an hour into the interview, something unexpected happened. The studio lights began to flicker, and a strange buzz filled the air. "What's happening?" Jake asked, looking around confused. Before I could answer, a bright light flooded the studio. It was so intense that I had to close my eyes. When I opened them again, I was stunned by what I saw. A luminous figure hovered in the center of the studio. It wasn't solid, but it wasn't completely ethereal either. Its presence emanated a sense of power and authority that left me breathless. Jake was frozen in his chair, mouth agape. The technicians on the other side of the glass looked equally shocked. Then the figure spoke. Its voice resonated not just in the studio, but seemed to echo inside each of us. "The time of truth has come. For too long, my message has been distorted, my will misinterpreted. Mary was chosen to be a messenger, but all of you are called to seek the truth." Tears streamed down my face as I listened. It was the same voice I had heard during my near-death experience, the same one that had guided me throughout this journey. The figure continued, "The institutions of men have corrupted my word. True faith is not in empty rituals or rigid doctrines, but in love, compassion, and the sincere search for truth." Jake, still in shock, managed to stammer, What are you?" The figure turned to him, its light dimming slightly, allowing us to see a face full of love and wisdom. "I am the one you seek, the one you have distorted, the one you have forgotten. I am here to restore the truth." For several minutes, the figure continued to speak, revealing truths that shook the foundations of everything we thought we knew about spirituality and religion. It spoke about unconditional love, about the true nature of the afterlife, about how human doctrines had strayed from the original path. As the light began to fade and the figure to disappear, its last words echoed in the studio. "Remember, the truth will set you free. Do not fear, for I am with you always." And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure was gone. The studio was in absolute silence for several seconds before Jake finally spoke. "Mary, what just happened?" I smiled, feeling a peace I had never experienced before. "The truth, Jake. The truth just happened." In the days that followed, the podcast recording went viral. Millions of people around the world watched and listened to what had happened in that studio. As expected, reactions were diverse. Some called it an elaborate hoax, others a divine miracle. But for many, it was the beginning of a profound journey of questioning and spiritual seeking. I knew our struggle was far from over. There would be more challenges, more opposition. But now we had something that no one could deny, a powerful testimony of the truth we were destined to share. The spiritual revolution I had glimpsed in my near-death experience was just beginning, and I was ready to lead the way, no matter what lay ahead.